Great. Hi, Venetia.
Hi, Darren. Good to see you.
It's wonderful to see you. I'm so excited to have a chance to talk with you. I've been aware of your work for many years. We met through my dear friend Henrietta. And so, yeah, I'm really excited. I think what you're doing is astonishing, and brilliant and human and heroic. And so I'm just so happy to have a chance to introduce others who may not know about you or your work to what you've been up to.
Okay. Well, that's makes me makes me feel a bit humble, actually. I mean, what I'm doing is I just kind of, I don't know, just seemed a pretty obvious thing to do, really. So anyway.
If only it were a pretty obvious thing to more of us.
Yeah, well, I do. There's a lot of people who do this kind of work too. Well, not a lot of people, but a few people that I work with who are amazing, who are.
So, why don't you take a moment and just tell us a little bit about your work, and we'll start there.
Okay. Well, so I didn't become an attorney until I wasn't an attorney until 2017. So I have a long history of different careers prior to that. But I went to law school in 2014. I was 43 when I went to law school, and at the time, I had had a business in New York, and I'd, lost it in the crash, and didn't have any further education. So I'd gone to community college, and I'd never even my wildest dreams ever imagined becoming a lawyer. But almost immediately I started at community college. It just popped into my brain that I could become a lawyer, which up until that moment I didn't even know was anything I had an aspiration to do. And I think I had a lot of angst about having had a business fail and hadn't maybe not lived my best life for a number of years. And so I felt like an obligation that I had a duty to do something to help other people. And so that's kind of, I went into wanting to be a lawyer that way. And I was always very kind of fascinated and horrified by the American criminal justice system. And so always wanted to help people in the particularly and originally with the death penalty. But as I became more educated, I became more concerned about life without the possibility of parole. So basically, I wanted to help people who had these sentences, because really there's no one helping any of these people. And so I started kind of through law school being really interested in that. And I got to work on a clemency petition when I was a law student for a man who had life without the possibility of parole, and he did eventually get released. And so after I graduated law school, I just dived right into the world of clemency, which is essentially begging for mercy. And so that is what I did for several years. And we had the good fortune to have an amazing governor in Oregon during those years. And so I was able to get quite a lot of people out of prison through clemency. And then I kind of expanded out into helping people with parole. And now I work with people who have constitutional challenges to their conviction, whether their rights were violated. Helping people get out of prison is basically what I do.
Wow, that's amazing. Give me just a moment. I'm going to shut my windows so that we can reduce traffic noise here.
Sure.
Um, there we go. So tell us a little bit about your first attempt to affect somebody's life path who is in prison.
Right. Well, the first person was when I was a law student. And he was a guy who he'd been in prison since my 21st birthday. And then, which just blew my mind, the idea that just how long a period of time that was. And it was my first time that I'd really gone into a maximum security prison, and my first time actually getting to talk with a prisoner or someone who'd been in prison for a long time. And so, it was the first time I got to interview someone about their life. And, it's just right from the beginning, it's always just just so many tragedies wrapped into one, usually is when somebody gets to a life sentence in prison, most of the time, it's nothing like the movies and it's nothing like any book you've ever read. It's just somebody who every bad decision that could be made on one day and every bad bit of timing, it's like this perfect storm of badness happens and then this tragedy occurs. And so that's kind of what really affected me at the beginning. And then what really inspired me was that to imagine, because generally the consequences of your action when someone gets killed or someone gets murdered is obviously 10 times worse than maybe what you intended. So you're paying, you've done this unbelievably terrible thing and you've taken a life which is really just just a horrific thing to have done. And then how do you find meaning in your life? How do you sit in a prison with a sentence like that and not go into a world of darkness and instead become a good person and try and be a great citizen? And I just was inspired and overawed by the first person I met's story of how he had lived his life in prison and the person he had become under those circumstances. And so I was very inspired by that. And of course, I wanted to work with more people and learn a little bit more. I mean, I guess it was a sort of massive curiosity as well. And also, I suppose, empathy and a concern about would I have the character to make something of myself under those circumstances, or would I give up? Or would I just lean into darkness, which a lot of people do? So that was my first experience, and it took us several years for him to get out. I think it was about 5 years of work before he eventually walked out of prison, but he did. So yeah.
What was that moment like?
Well, unfortunately, so I was on that case as a law student, so he wasn't my client, and he ended up getting out of prison, and so I was really happy that he got out, but I had tons of my own clients get out by that point. So I can kind of talk at the beginning when I first started as a lawyer. I graduated law school, took the bar, and then 3 days later, I started my job as a clemency attorney. And at the time, we decided, because Governor Brown was herself a woman, and she had some problems with prison overcrowding, and she had kind of mentioned to us that if we could find 20 women that were commute people she might commute, that would really resolve her problem. And at the time she had said, just find me people who've done low level kind of identity theft stuff. There's something low risk for her. But what we felt was that there was much higher risk for her to commute someone who's maybe in and out of prison because for political purposes. So we actually chose to work with lifers. And so the first people I worked with were all women who had killed, generally speaking, a husband or a domestic partner. Often there was a lot of abuse that had led to these crimes. And so, I mean, I can tell you the first time that I got a commutation, I was shaking and crying and sobbing. I couldn't even like barely tell her. I was shaking so much I could barely dial the phone into the prison to let her know. So I was an emotional wreck at the beginning with every case because it was just unbelievable that someone was going to walk out of prison. If you've worked in the system for a while, you realize what a miracle that is. So yeah, I cried a lot at the beginning. Now I'm all jaded and, I don't have such extreme emotions anymore, you know.
That's funny to hear. I had when I asked you the question and still and now I feel myself pretty choked up just to hear about these things. Uh, there's so much there's so much emotion in my own life um, where I have felt, I've had very deep feelings about the problems in what is ironically in the United States called the correctional, system. Um, and for reasons I don't entirely understand, perhaps it's just that I'm a human being and I'm empathic. I just feel like I have a lot of feelings about prison and how laws are handled and what, the American system of what we call justice, which seems pretty bizarre, and that's something that I want to explore with you.
Yes.
Um, but yeah, even just trying to talk about it right now, I feel kind of choked up, and I think it's partly because I'm so uh, I have such reverence for what you've been doing. Um, It's almost as if you've fulfilled something I've had a dream about, in my or at least a feeling in my heart about ever since I was very small, once I realized what was going on in prisons and what they were about and all this kind of thing. Um, but so that we can continue down a reasonably organized path,
Okay.
uh, how did you come to how did you become a clemency lawyer, and did someone hire you? Talk about the early days.
Oh yeah. Well, so I went to law school. I went to law school and I had a very specific, like most people just go, I think they go to law school to become a lawyer. And I went very specifically wanting to help people who other people wouldn't help. I'm not, that was just what I decided, that I felt like I had a debt to society that I needed to pay. And so that was kind of my mindset. And I remember saying to myself the whole time, I want to be in the trenches. I want to be in the trenches. I don't know what I meant by that, but that was kind of my mindset. And so I was lucky. I went to Lewis and Clark Law School, which is, I think, objectively the best law school in Oregon. And about a year before I got started applying to law school, Eliza Kaplan is a well, a former Innocence Project attorney. She was the director of the Innocence Project in New York, nationally at one point, and she was semi-famous. She had sort of worked with Barry Scheck from the inception of the Innocence Project. So she moved to Oregon to work at the law school. And so I knew that she was there, and I was determined to go and work with her. And I think when I was an undergrad, I wrote my thesis about life without parole and the death penalty. And I think I was really interested in innocence at the beginning, but I moved away from that. And I felt that the innocence movement kind of essentially sucks all the oxygen out of it sort of suck all the kind of reform focus goes to this idea. What about innocence? Innocence. And of course, innocence is a big deal. It's a horrific idea that someone innocent is in prison. But I think the problem with that is that we tend to then focus too much on the guilty people deserve what they get. We're going to focus on the innocent people. And I kind of wrote my undergrad thesis on kind of the unintended consequences of the abolitionist movement. And one of those unintended consequences was after the death penalty was ruled unconstitutional in 1972, and then it was reinstated in 1976, legislatures across the country added in LWOP as a punishment for death. Before then, it was either death or life. And what that meant most of the time is that juries are just human beings, and most juries aren't comfortable condemning someone to death. And so it would be life 30 was the more popular punishment, and death only for those most extreme cases. And they added in LWOP, and that's life without the possibility of parole. And that became a very palatable punishment for juries to hand down. And so there's this massive movement of hundreds or 100,000 people suddenly with LWOP sentences in America, where before the death penalty was ruled unconstitutional, there was maybe 3 or 4,000 people. And so I became very focused on LWOP because people who are sentenced to death have an enormous amount of litigation opportunities to get off death row, whereas people who have LWOP tend to have pleaded to LWOP or have been sentenced to it, and then they're just stuck in prison. So I became much more focused on those people before I got to law school, and there were so few avenues for relief for them. When I learned about clemency, I think I learned about clemency from Eliza. When I was a first year law student, it spoke to me. And the reason it did is because on a really obvious level, I have received so many second chances in my life, most specifically getting to go to law school in my 40s. And I've made tons of mistakes and I've been given more chances. And that's what clemency is. And so I immediately knew that I wanted to be involved in doing clemency and trying to help people with these LWOP and life sentences get relief. It was obvious to me, and so that's how I got into it. But there was no jobs. There are no jobs for clemency lawyers. There's no right to clemency. There's no constitutional right for a lawyer. But Eliza, who was the professor at the law school, I went to work for her the whole way through law school. We did a death penalty cost study together, and she got funding to hire me as the first clemency attorney of her legal clinic right after I left law school. So that's what I did. And I'm very, very lucky that I had Eliza in my life because otherwise, I mean, I was the only lawyer in Oregon who was doing clemency full time. There was no one doing clemency other than me, really, at the beginning. I mean, once we started having success, more people started doing it. But up until that point, clemency was dead. It had been dead really since Willie Horton. Remember the Willie Horton
Oh
affair?
my goodness. Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of squashed the desire that people had to do clemency. It's politically dangerous for a governor. There's no upside for them. And with the war on crime in the 90s and the whole political culture in this country, no political leader really wants to look like that he's soft on crime, you know.
Presuming that clemency means soft on crime, but
It
yeah,
doesn't, but that's how
right.
everything's perceived. Yeah.
Exactly. That's how
Yeah.
it's spun. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. That's so amazing. So in a way, you could say that you actually pioneered the reemergence of clemency.
Well, Eliza would probably want to get in on that. I,
Sure.
I mean, I think they were doing clemency up in Washington, the state next to us. And the first cases I worked on as a law student were up in Washington. And they had this clemency process in place that they had kind of like a clemency board, like a parole board, and people could apply. And it was a process that the governors were using up there,
Hmm.
especially. But there was nothing in Oregon. And so Eliza definitely saw an opening. That with Governor Brown, that maybe she would be interested, although she had no real background in the criminal justice system. And we definitely worked very hard over a period of years to get her to grant them. Like we got the first 3 years, I felt like a snake oil salesman. I'm going into the women's prison. I'm enlisting these women who are amazing, what we believe to be amazing candidates. I'm getting them to tell me their whole life story and dredge up every painful moment in their lives. I'm writing their story. I'm giving them hope in a place where hope is dangerous. And then Governor Brown would deny, deny, deny. And then I'd have to go back in the prison and break their hearts. And I was so demoralized. I felt like the worst lawyer in the world.
Oh,
It's like by the end of 2019, I had just not had one person, except I'd had a juvenile get relief, or two juveniles, but they weren't really, I mean, they weren't really with long sentences. They were just kind of easier cases for the governor. And I remember feeling like this is awful. I can't keep doing this anymore. And then in February 2020, she granted our first big DOC petition. And it was the most exciting day I mean, one of the most exciting days of my life. But I felt, I mean, I was just so, it was awful for a really long time. We wrote a law review article. We would put out op-eds and we would try and hustle up support and compel her to look at these cases seriously. So yeah, it took a long time. I can't remember the question, but I'm just rambling. But there
no,
you,
that's wonderful.
yeah.
Um, it must have been astonishing for you, first of all, to go into a prison for the first time. Can you say something about what that was like the first time you went in?
Yeah. Well, I'll move on to the first time I went to the women's prison in Oregon because that was really amazing, different. So I'd gone to the prison up in Washington, Monroe Prison, that's now closed, where I met my first client, and it's a very kind of very prisony prison, old school. But I went to Coffee Creek, which is the women's prison in Oregon. And the first time I went, I went to meet a bunch of lifers when I was a law student. And so I know, you don't really know what to expect. And anyway, we sat in a little circle and we talked about criminal justice issues with them and their lives. And I was just dumbfounded because I was sitting next to one of the most intelligent, lovely women I'd met in ages, and I couldn't get my head around the idea that she was in prison. And so that was really confusing and just didn't make any sense to me. And also, I always said that the women's prison is like the saddest community center in the world because they have like a lot of all the women are separated from their children, and there's so much grief and depression that just permeates the whole place. So it's kind of a painful environment to be in. Like you go into the visiting room, they have a little children's area, and it's just really sad. And the grief is for the women, particularly. It's just the women are so sad and depressed, and most of them, of course, there are women who do terrible things, but a lot of the women in prison are there, generally speaking, because of meth addiction and identity theft. And a lot of the time, because of the way the sentences are operated in Oregon, if they don't have a family member or someone to take their children will often be adopted away from them, even
Mm,
when they don't have long sentences. So
mm,
there's just a lot of pain. It's really the number one atmosphere. But most of all, I just remember just meeting people who were really like people who were in prison, but they're but for the God. I mean, it could be me, it could be you. It's just the way their lives have unfolded. Um, and 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 also, I guess I'm not going back to the first time. The first time was just an eye opener because it wasn't the idea that we have about how prisoners are going to be just isn't true. Prisoners are just other people who happen to have been convicted of crimes and are now having to live with the consequences of their poor choices in the most painful way, you know.
mm. You said something a little earlier that I'd just like to circle back to briefly. You used the phrase a debt to society. What did you mean by that?
Well, in I guess in New York, I had had a business and I felt like I did, I lost the business in the crash. I had a catering business which I'd run with Henrietta and it went
Oh,
space. And
mhm,
I felt like a real failure. I felt like, like everyone would go, well, it was the economic crash. And that's true to some degree, but I felt like I had really failed and let people down. And I felt, when you lose a business, like people are quite casual about what it takes out of you, it's just that the the loss of all of that, I felt like I just didn't, I felt a lot of shame, really. I felt a lot of
mm,
shame. And, I left New York very penniless with my two boys. And we had literally taken the Greyhound out to Portland and I'd gone from having this business, which was somewhat of a good business, and then suddenly being right at the bottom of society, a single mother on food stamps at community college. And I'd given up alcohol. I felt like I'd always drunk too much. My mother had died. I just felt a lot of like I felt like I had not lived my best life. I felt like I felt like I owed, I felt ashamed of the loss of the business. And I wanted to make, I felt, at the beginning, I volunteered for like the Red Cross and did stuff like that because I just felt that. I don't, like I just felt like I hadn't lived the way I should have.
mm,
And so that kind of, that really motivated me for a number of
mm.
years.
Yeah, I can understand. I can understand what you've said, even from my own personal experience. I also lost a business at one point, and I still feel confused about all of
Yeah,
that.
it is it's like you put everything into it, but it's also like I know I made mistakes. I
Yeah.
wasn't good at it. Like I
Hmm.
would never have a business again. I was bad at it. I never really understood the connection, but I always thought if you just do a good job, you'll make profit, but that's not how it works. And I was
Hmm.
very naive. I just anyway, so and I felt like I hadn't been the greatest mother because I'd worked all the time. So I had a lot of guilt about my children and just I had a lot of guilt and shame that was pushing me forward.
I see. So maybe a debt to society isn't actually the right phrase.
Yeah, maybe it's
Right.
just I felt a debt of
Yes,
some
yes.
kind that I felt like I needed to turn things around in a deep way for
Hmm.
myself.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that makes sense. I understand.
yeah.
How did you become interested in the system that punishes criminals? And what were some of the motivating feelings that you had that drew you in that direction?
Well, I suppose like you, from my childhood, I've always had a sort of grim fascination and horror of prison. I always used to have recurring nightmares of being in prison when I was a child, and the idea of, like all people having autonomy over my life is incredibly important. And so the loss of autonomy is really chilling and frightening. I think I was before I came to America, I thought I had a very kind of naive, simplistic understanding of this country that came from watching, Spielberg movies. And so I thought America was this just perfect country. And then I remember just being dumbfounded when I heard that there was a death penalty here. It didn't make any sense to me. And so I guess I've always been interested in the dark side of America that I didn't understand before I came here. And then, I spent a lot of time in the South in the 90s. And I was living in New York in the 90s. I remember I was part of, the war on crime and the mass incarceration that's happened in this country and how destructive it's been, in my opinion, and the opinion of a lot of sensible people. So I think all of those reasons, and then just all of those reasons, just a sheer horror of it, really.
Hmm.
And also, I guess, fascination,
Hmm.
you
Say
know.
more about that.
I've learned more about human nature doing this job and human behavior and human frailty. I've learned more about myself. I've learned more about, I've learned so much about the world through working in prisons and with prisoners for the last 7 years. It's completely, um, it's fascinating work. I mean, it's a, I get to understand how we operate as humans in a way that I never understood before. So I guess it's sort of, I question my motive sometimes, what am I doing this for? I'm so interested in, but then also I'm so connected to the pain of people's stories now. I know the story. I know the story they're going to tell, you know, it's a similar story for everyone. The happy middle class people with loving parents are not in prison,
Hmm.
you know. I mean, very rarely. Yeah.
It sounds like your work has been both very challenging, but also deeply enriching.
Yeah, it's very painful at times. Um, you can't help everyone. It's really hard to come to terms with that. There are some people who are not going to get out, and there's nothing you can do about that. We don't have any power to really, we only have the power to try and persuade people with power.
Hmm.
And so that's frustrating and painful. The system is against our clients. They've committed crimes, most of them, but serious crimes. They've caused incredible damage. They've done things that I don't know how it's confusing in some ways. But also, yeah, it's by far and away the best thing I've ever done. I mean, I wouldn't, I've had an interesting life, but this is just feel like, do you ever read that book of Human Bondage by W. Somerset Maugham? It's an English novel. You probably,
I
yeah.
know the title and the author, and I've probably read parts of it, but it was a long, long time ago. What brings it to mind for you, and say something about it?
Well, it's a really wonderful novel. It's sort of it's supposedly a semi-autobiographical novel of Somerset Maugham's life in the kind of end of the 19th century, um, in England, and just how hard life was then for everyone. And he, at one point, he is training to be a doctor in London, and he just describes, because you're just seeing so much pain and suffering, but he just felt like it was life, like he was, all its colors, all its shapes. And I feel that in prison in a way, like I'm seeing how people respond to this awful situation that they've generally put themselves into. And I'm seeing people behave in just an extraordinary kind of different ways, how they cope, how they don't cope, how they survive, how they gather strength, how they transform themselves. It's just it's just so human. So yeah, that's what I mean, I think. Yeah. So I think that book really captures it well in a far better way than I ever could. So that's why I thought about it.
What is something you've learned about prison that you think ordinary people just don't have any idea about or don't know?
Oh, that's a big question.
What do you want ordinary people to know? Is another way of phrasing.
Well, I think it's not, I mean, prison, obviously prison is designed to be dehumanizing. It's a way to kind of bring people down and control them. But I think ordinary people in America especially are very conditioned to just have absolute uh, harsh feelings towards people who've been convicted of crimes and to believe that they deserve everything that's coming their way. But I think people should probably recognize everyone's humanity a little bit better. But I think probably I'd say American prison is really stupid, and people should realize how stupid it is. because everyone here just accepts these incredibly long sentences that we hand out, unlike anywhere else in the world, pretty much, how pointless it is. And I'll tell you, like, I've read, I guess I can't remember specifically, but I read Foucault and some stuff like that when I was in undergrad, just the utter pointlessness of it all. I mean, basically, we're just putting these people in these prisons. Most of them are going to get out, and yet we just sit there, we put them in this brutal environment, doesn't teach them anything positive, doesn't help anyone. The only people who transform themselves in prison are people who go out of their way to try and do so. It's really difficult. Most of the time you're just caught in this world of negativity and you're just treading water, and there's nothing positive happening. It's stupid. If we're going to put people in prison and we want them to come back into society, then we should be setting them up to succeed and overcome their failings, which we don't do. We have a very punitive approach. Then we expect people to re-enter society and to not commit more crimes and to just make a success. It's incredibly hard to re-enter American society from a technological point of view alone if you've been in prison for more than 5 years. I mean, how do you even re-enter? There's no preparation for that. It's really stupid, And then, we also, oh gosh, I'm just trying to think of all. I mean, it's such a
Mhm.
so I think our prisons are stupid and cruel for no good reason. And then because we're punishing all these people for decades at a time, if you go to prison at 20 and you come out at 40, how are you going to make a success? If you want to put someone in prison for 20 years, it should be for something really, 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 really serious. A lot of the time, it'll be just consecutive sentences for something maybe minor. So it's just not sensible what we're doing. It's just so non-constructive. Um, and so people come out and they're not going to succeed. And then in addition to that, it's like the massive amount of money that's being poured into prisons for people to die in prison, the medical costs. It doesn't make any sense. But you can't talk about it or have rational conversations in America because that you're accused of being soft on crime, but not thinking about like what's good for the society as a whole. I mean, we just made a conclusion hundreds of years ago that if you do something bad, then punishment is the consequence. Why? That's not a natural consequence. We've just made that decision. Why aren't, for instance, people making amends? Be a far better use of their time. It would be more in keeping, if you come from a Christian background, the idea of redemption. Surely we should be giving people a chance to redeem themselves in some way, to make good to the best of their ability. And we don't do that. You know, we just warehouse them. And by the way, not just them, all the poor men and women who work in prisons. I mean, they're also stuck in prison and it's futile. They're just moving people around in a warehouse all day long for no reason. So I think it's stupid the way we do it.
I hope you wouldn't mind if I opine a bit on
Oh,
this
go
problem
on.
myself,
Yeah.
because it's plagued me since childhood. So in my heart, right, in my emotional self, the idea that people are put in cages just seems fundamentally wrong. So if there's some kind of an egregious wrong that someone participates in, right, and then we go to extreme lengths to quote punish this person who was participating in it, then we all become complicit in their torture. And it's really hard for me to understand that anyone could not understand that torturing humans is fundamentally ethically wrong. There's no possibility of justifying something like that under any circumstances whatsoever, right? And there's all these arguments. Oh, go ahead if you
No,
have.
no, no, I'm listening.
Yeah.
Carry on.
There's all these arguments that I think that are fundamentally wrong and stupid, as you've said. And one of them is that crime is a banking system, right?
Yeah.
If you do wrong, then you have to, quote, pay for the wrong. But let's be clear, there's no way to pay. There's no kind of paying that undoes the wrong. And certainly punishment, being punished, has nothing to do with undoing the wrong whatsoever. Nothing,
No,
right?
and it's such a terrible racket, really, because these poor people who've suffered, they're victims of a crime or someone they love has been killed. And, they're kind of sold this concept of justice by prosecutors, by the system. We're going to get justice for you. There's no justice. How can there be justice? Someone is gone. Something cannot be undone. It
Yeah.
is a horrific tragedy, but there is no justice. And so, but they're told that they're going to get justice. We're going to put him in prison. We're going to execute him. We're going to put him in prison for 30 years. I want justice. And there is no, there can't be this, that it's just this whole concept is ridiculous. And it doesn't help victims, I don't think, either. It continues to make them suffer, actually. And it continues to make them suffer because they can't, having that person put in prison or having that person be punished or having that person suffer, it doesn't help them heal in
No.
any way. If anything, it keeps them angry, which is the worst place to be, you know?
Yes, we are. It's part of our socialization in the United States and what I call enculturization, right? It
Mm.
actually has something to do with language too, because at least in the United States, and I think this is true in many Western countries, but to a differing degree, we are actually inculcated, right? We are scripted by the culture to believe that to think about situations, relationships, and culture as if they are courtrooms. We are inculcated with this sort of courtroom consciousness. And it starts in childhood. You can see your peers and other children start to think about what would happen if we had to go to court or play acting out a courtroom drama or a court scene or something like this. And you can see that the children are being scripted by the culture. They're being molded into a mindset that is absolutely without anything resembling justification, um, and is horrific. If we become complicit, which we do by paying taxes and supporting the system and failing to establish a better system and so forth, in the torture of other beings, then that's a catastrophic moral failing for us. And those of us who live in this culture and have any degree of awareness about this matter, we feel a terrible burden. And the people who work in the prisons are dehumanized and feel a terrible burden too. And it's a very depressing thing to do. And it's a weird sort of compressed, it's basically like inventing a kind of hell on earth and then just funding the hell out of it, right? Just
Mhm.
pouring money into it and making it into a business and so forth. This kind of thing must come to an end somehow. This is completely wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. It's just that it's the our whole everything we're doing is I don't really have a better word other than just stupid and callous and thoughtless and just everyone just closes their eyes to it and bitches about, oh well, they're getting free food and and sort of free healthcare and all this kind of they knew. But yeah, no, I mean I'm losing my tracks. I'm like, yes, I agree with you. It's just maddening, really. And I was going to say something, but it's gone. It was going to be brilliant as well. So I can't
Perhaps
remember.
it'll come back. We'll just keep circling around.
Yeah.
So there's a few more things that I really need to say.
Yeah.
I know that there are many people who've written brilliantly about this problem. I am specifically aware of some things Derek Jensen has written about this. He's an activist, a brilliant American activist and ecologist author,
Hmm.
and he's written extensively about this topic. I'm mentioning his name so that people who are listening could tune in. Are there any people that you have read who particularly impressed you with their perspectives?
I have barely read anything since I became a lawyer. I was a really great reader my whole life, and now I'm a lawyer. I can barely read anything. So I'm trying to think what I've read. I mean, I'm so immersed in all the reading I do. I'm like really embarrassed now. So no, I don't. I can't think of anyone who's read anything. I read some. Trying to remember I read a couple of books about the philosophy of punishment recently because I've been
Mm,
thinking a lot about like which was what made me even just contemplate like why is everyone so comfortable with punishment as a concept? You know, I mean, it's been like that forever, but why? That's not a necessary. That's not a necessary, it doesn't help anything
Right.
particularly. I mean, I do recognize, having worked with a lot of prisoners now in different ways, that there are different kinds of people in prison. So, when I first started, I was only working with people who were in prison for a very, very long time, who were kind of incredible people. I was sort of working with people who had really just done these incredible transformative things in prison, and were very deep thinkers, and truly amazing people. So I think at the beginning I was a little too romantic about prison, and just, everyone there, and I just thought I was, just seemed, as I've worked with more people, I am aware that, first of all, there are some people who shouldn't be in society because they're going to cause a lot of damage. Not many, but there's a few people. And then there are plenty of people who have got caught into a negative way of understanding their life in the world. And so they need to have help kind of change their way of thinking in order for them to succeed in society. Um, but as I said, there's only a very few people who I feel need to be kept away from everyone else. Most people would benefit from Most people who've committed crimes, in my experience, are fairly broken by what they've done, especially serious crimes. And they have a desperate desire to serve, to make amends, to repent, if you will. And they're not given those it's hard for them to do that. And then there's a few people who are problematic, that they're just, very few people, they need to be, there needs to be some protection for society, for individuals. And
Mhm.
then most other people are just really, if they had been socialized better, if they hadn't grown up in the foster care system, if they'd had people who loved them, who nurtured them, who taught them how to live in the world, they will be fine, you know.
Mhm.
And so I'm not talking philosophically at all, but I'm just speaking quite practically. There's no need for this the way we're doing it. There's no need for it at all, not any part of it, you know. But how to change that in this country, in America, that's a very difficult question, because people are really, as you said, they're socialized to believe in this without question.
Mhm.
Even my like super liberal friends, who think of themselves as, super liberal, they'll be like, Venetia, I think it's great what you're doing. I'd love to help him in some way. My husband has a catering business, and he would be happy to hire some people when they come out of prison. And I'd be like, oh, that's great. Oh, but we can't have anyone who committed a violent crime or a felony, and we only want people who did this. And I'm like, go away, you know, go away. If I mean, I blame Hollywood as well.
Mm. No, no, I agree.
Yeah.
It's as if there are, well, I mean, this gets into some complex ground here, but maybe we'll cover it. Maybe we'll walk through this little field briefly together. In America, I think we're too quick to use this word we. We don't do this. We think this. The people, the blah, blah, blah. But actually, mostly what we have here is the absence of a we. And it's the absence of a we that presents as a we, but there's actually nothing inside it. It's like dead inside, and it's stupid inside, and it's filled with processes that ride on humans. And what we call the criminal justice system is exactly that kind of process. It's a dead inside thing, like a cancer or a vampire or something, right? And it just rides on generation after generation after generation, and it sucks up resources and it makes agony, and it has nothing to do with justice. What it has to do with is preserving the dead monster of that system and how it rides on our culture. And I think it's really important for people to understand that we're surrounded by monsters like this. Our
Hmm.
political systems, our judicial systems, the military industrial prison complex, these are effectively demons. They are
Hmm.
the absence of humans pretending to act in the interest of humans that are powerless, uneducated, and completely sort of hypnotized by the narratives that we're subjected to from childhood through each phase of our life, right? And it's as if half of our interiority is some kind of a zombie that just goes around thinking like, well, of course you have to, well, punish those people. Well, what are you going to do instead? I mean, there's a really simple answer to what to do instead. Like, if somebody's smashing their head against a wall over and over again and it's just causing more pain and blood, the first thing you do is you just stop smashing your head against you just stop doing something that's that stupid, right? And then you can say, well, people have to be taken out of society, whatever. Yes, of course, but there's some kind of humane way to do that that doesn't make us complicit in torturing not just the people themselves, but their families, their lineage, their history of their family, the people who have to torture them, the whole sort of mangled up mess of this problem. So that's one thing I want to make really clear is just like there's no we. I don't know what we means. It doesn't mean we never formed an intelligent collective to deal with any of these problems. So the way that they get mostly dealt with, and I'm sorry if I'm lecturing here a bit or
No, no. I mean, I agree with you on the we. I have an internal shudder when I hear, we don't do that here, or we don't. I always feel like a rebellion in my
yeah,
soul when I hear that
we
language.
who? What
Yeah,
we?
I'll do what I want,
Yeah,
yeah.
like that. The absence of a we being
Yeah.
presented as a we, it's like a victim
No,
we.
but it's very oppressive. It's like
Yeah.
controlling. This is what we think. Good, or one of my other things that makes me shudder is when they say, good folk. So anything to do with the word folk always scares me. As a
Oh my
slight
God, you wouldn't believe. That's so funny that you say that. Please continue.
no, no, no. Why?
Maybe I can show you something because it's very ironic that you said this. Can you hang on for just a
Yeah,
second?
of course.
Okay, I'll be right back. So these are two paintings that are hanging in my hallway.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Good,
Oh, that's brilliant.
right?
For some- Okay.
Those were made by the son of the man who invented the Super Soaker squirt gun, believe it or not.
Okay.
All right, so that was a little bit of a sidetrack. Um, it's really weird. What we call society isn't one. Or rather, there's a few threads of something resembling a society that managed to survive inside the mostly malignant, situation. And these are things that I study, right? I'm fascinated by these things in the same way that I'm fascinated by the problem of prisons. I never believed that punishment was the right idea at all. Um, and I want to say a little bit about something because we were talking earlier about justice.
Yeah. That elusive
And
concept.
it's true that we can't, if somebody's been injured or killed or something, right? It's pretty tough to, if they've been injured, there might be some way of partial remediation or something like this.
Hmm.
But torturing the person that injured them is not the right thing to do. Um, and making us complicit in that is just, I can't even understand. Like, what kind of a mind, what sort of primitive, barbaric, medieval, dungeoneering consciousness thought this up and was able to make it happen, right, in a way that has lasted and continues to last. It staggers the mind. Um, but it occurs to me that the people that we call criminals, they are like people who've been infected with something. And if we wanted to resolve the something that infected them in our culture and our society, not only would we not punish the criminals, we would use them to forensically trace back the poison in our society that produced their behavior. And we would understand that these are like children who've been subjected to a poisonous substance and then produce symptoms, right? And so we would forensically trace the symptoms back to their origins and resolve them there. And that's what people would actually want. they might, they might be really angry that their husband or wife or child was killed or something like this, perhaps justifiably angry. But what they would want, there's no way to punish, there's no way to bring them joy by tormenting the person that did this. What would bring them joy is if we resolved the problems in our culture that keep producing this behavior in people.
Well, now you sound like one of us. I mean, this is literally
Good.
how we feel on a daily basis. Is like, so when a crime is committed, the way the statutes are written, it's like, was the gun lifted? Did they shoot it? Okay, guilty. We don't need to look at the person. We don't need to look at the individual. And our sentencing in this country is like, that's the crime, that's the punishment. Now piss off, right?
Mhm.
What we be doing clemency is we bring it all out and we want to look at the person, we want to look at their whole life story, and we want to tell the story of what how they got to the day when this happened, and who they then. It's like kind of like AA. This is who I was, this is what happened, and this is who I am now. And the minute you look at someone's story and you see their humanity, well, then you kind of don't want them to be in prison, and that's how the clemency happens. That's where the governor understands and sees the person in their humanity, how this happened, why it happened, and right. I mean, I start one of the first things I read was a really good book by a lawyer called David Doe, Dow. He's a death penalty lawyer in Texas, and it was a series of essays about everything he had learned as a death penalty lawyer, and he gave this staggering statistic to me that I feel sums it all up. Something like, at the time, I think it was 81% of the men on death row in Texas grew up in the foster care system. Okay. So, and I did a death penalty cost study in Oregon, and I saw that at least 50% of the crimes involved methamphetamine, one way or another. So the idea that these are the bad people who need to be punished forever is just foul, really, because we're talking about people who have, I mean, the foster care system is brutal. I can tell you stories all day long about the suffering that my clients have gone through as children. It is sickening what they've gone through. And yeah, they cause damage at some point, for sure.
Mhm.
But the idea that these people are bad and need to be punished forever is so inhumane, because actually, as I've noticed from working with my clients, is a few crumbs of kindness and someone will blossom. A little bit of love, a little bit of being, I mean, I don't like to use this language, but like when I would write people's stories and they would be so moved that someone had listened to them and told their story, and like and they felt like that even if I didn't get them out, it was enough that their story had been told. Actually, they wanted to get out too, but and so yes, you're absolutely right. Like we need to be looking at people as individuals and stop with just focusing on the crime. If we want to change things for the better, we should be recognizing our own culpability in how these crimes happen, because these crimes don't happen, contrary to how Hollywood likes to present people who've committed crimes as these kind of killing machines who will kill at every opportunity. Like most people just, there's always tragedy behind the story, not always, but virtually always,
Mhm.
and people are are capable of an enormous transformation if given even a little bit of a chance. And we're not giving people the chance.
No, we're doing the opposite of giving them
Yeah,
a chance,
we are. We're sticking a thumb on them and going, you're nothing, you're nothing, you're nothing.
right?
And
And
we're going to
crushing them,
degrade you at every single day, every single
right?
moment. And then you're going
Which
to come out
actually
of
just
prison.
reiterates the injustice of their
Yeah.
childhood in their adult life.
Yeah. And how
This
are
is
they
what I
going to
mean by
believe in
torture.
anything? Yeah.
This is exactly what this is torture.
Yeah.
And there's no, I mean, the idea that there's something in our Constitution about uh, absurd punishments, right? Like, I can't remember
Excessive. Yeah.
the actual
Excessive.
phrase,
Yeah.
right? But yeah,
Cruel and unusual. Yeah.
yes, that's it. Cruel and
Yeah.
unusual. I mean, what could be more cruel and unusual than torturing humans in a cage? Like, you'd have to really do
Definitely, it's
something.
extreme. It really depends on how you understand the word unusual. So I've had
Okay.
this fight myself because I think about this. So people, you'll look at you'll look at a Supreme Court and they'll go, well, it's not unusual because we've been putting people in cages forever. And I would say, but think of unusual as meaning peculiar or wrong, right?
Yeah.
Like that's how I understand the word unusual. It's more of it was a very unusual punishment, meaning Not that it's uncommon, which is how it's interpreted, but
Right.
it's just very off, you know.
Yeah. Like
Yeah,
inhuman.
yeah, yeah.
And it's really weird because
Stop it.
the the systems that our society, the sort of organs of our society, they're not human.
No, no.
And they don't have emotions. They're not intelligent. They're not civilized. All of these things that we say and we think about our sort of advanced progress are mostly just bullshit. They're just like towering monolithic lies that keep lumbering forward, under the impetus of the money that we and the violence that we pour into them, right? So it occurs to me that okay, look, if I mean, you're probably aware of what happened in, I think, the 50s or 60s with the introduction of lead into gasoline.
Okay, tell me the story.
Okay, so there was a radical increase in violent crime over a specific epoch of the history of the United States, and it was eventually realized that the fumes from the gasoline, right, were destroying people's brain, their nervous systems, literally, right? And so, this is, I think, a serious problem. We're attacking individuals for the outcomes of the failure of our culture to produce anything that's humane or intelligent or civilized or communal, right? And so, if we're going to punish something, if somebody needs to go to jail, our culture should be in jail, right? It's just producing the poison that's torturing children and mothers and fathers and completely failing to support them in any nourishing or nurturing way, right?
I
And
mean,
so,
I think, yeah,
go
carry
ahead,
on.
please.
No, I mean, I was just going to say, I just think American society is, like you say, it doesn't exist anymore. Or, I remember, reading a lot about what a rich society this country had, a long time ago, where there was such strong communities and everyone was involved, and there was community organizations, whether it was church or bowling groups or golf or whatever. Like America was kind of, I'm thinking of that Alexis de Tocqueville book. I think it's called America, which he wrote, just what this country was. And that country doesn't exist anymore.
No.
We've got just
It's
wretched
like the it's like
loneliness
the
and atomization, and
yeah.
there's nothing. There's no community. I mean, community is something you have to really create for yourself,
Mhm.
if you've got the wherewithal to realize that's what you need.
Right.
But most people, they're so desperately lonely and isolated and under socialized, and it's just getting worse and worse. So we don't have humanity for each other as a consequence. We don't have policing, even that's community policing anymore, where everyone's invested in the success of the community. And remember when I was young, if someone did something wrong, let's say my brother, then I remember just a story of my brother doing some damage to the local farm. So the farmer showed up at the house and told my brother off, and he learned a lesson and he wouldn't do that again. That kind of community's gone. Now people call the police, the system comes in, and the system takes over. And once you're in the system, God help you, because they
Yeah, I
own
mean, I think
your life.
even God's going to have a rough time.
Good point. You're done
Yeah.
for life. The minute you're in the system, the minute you've got a conviction, they own you one way or
Mhm.
another. And
It's,
and
I mean, this leads into the problem of the slavery aspect, right,
hmm
of prisons and prisoneering. Like, this is a phrase that's very important to me because I think that many features of our culture that present as enabling or progress or something like this are actually just prisoneering. Facebook is really kind of a prisoneering paradigm. Yes, you can have connections there that are real and you can make real connections, but mostly what gets celebrated is the worst common denominator, and what gets sidelined is anything that's actually intelligent or humane or community building or radical or revolutionary or anything like that. But you know, I think there's another feature of this issue, which is that as our lives have been sort of fracked by American culture and the state and the banking system and the sort of the job system, which is another really kind of a form of slavery, the financial system, as our lives have been fracked and crucial resources have been extracted from us to be so that we can be sold back the wrapping paper on the candy bar, right? Again and again, we're being sold back the image of something that was stolen or snuffed, right? Then what that does is it builds a feeling that somebody has been ruining my life, right?
Mm-hmm.
Somebody has been ruining my life. And it must be those immigrants. It must be those criminals, right? And so there's this scripting to scapegoat. When actually, again, the perpetrator is really these dead, lumbering, monolithic systems that we serve without. I mean, how do you punish something that has no body, right? How do you get justice from something that's absolutely fundamental to the it's like the infrastructure of the environment itself that we live in, right? How do you call that out? How do you change it? How do we organize to make some kind of a shift? And one of the things that I think is amazing about your work is that in a way, you found a crack.
I tell you what, it's actually demoralizing, to be honest with you, because it was really exciting when we had a governor who was willing to do this. And I personally got to have some incredible experiences, but it was like getting struck by lightning. The truth is that for the people who got out, or it was like a miracle, a golden ticket, Willy Wonka. It
Mhm.
isn't real. Okay. Like
Mhm.
I am so delighted for each of my clients that they get to be free and they get a second chance at their lives. But they are like, the governor can feel oh so good about herself and pat herself on the back for her amazing humanity. Okay. But it's a trifle.
Mhm.
It's a trifle and it's really meaningless in reality because I mean not for those individuals but like
Right.
nothing has changed. If anything, we're worse off now because Governor Brown let out 100 people over the course of 8 years who for rehabilitation or roughly that. Because of that, now a massive pendulum swing against any kind of mercy in Oregon is happening, and now no one will get out for another generation because of these few 30 people. And like everyone will be like, so like in the end, I'm like, it's kind of like for me, yeah, you're right. I got the wrapping paper, but I didn't get the candy. It's just like I didn't help. I haven't really changed anything or helped anyone in any meaningful way. The system is, if anything, just a little bit nastier than it was before all the clemency happened, and it's only getting nastier
Mhm.
because that's the way. It's safer that way to be
Mhm.
meaner and to be more cruel than the politicians can be puffing themselves as being tough on crime to the American people who have bought into all this crap. We talk about freedom in this country. I don't know what we're talking about, what kind of freedom we're talking about. You know,
The freedom to be stupid and opinionated, I guess.
yeah, the freedom to believe you're a victim when the freedom to see the world. I mean, people aren't happy in this country. I don't see this as a happy when I first came to this country, or what I understood America to be before I came to this country doesn't exist.
Hmm.
I mean, I've never met such a group of people who are as unhappy as Americans who live in a land of plenty in many ways.
Hmm.
There should be a land of abundance and joy, and it isn't. You know, it's
No,
really
it's
a happy
weirdly
place, you
it's
know.
weirdly a kind of a land of like, well, I mean, look, there's a lot of different things going on, but one of the things that you're pointing out is true, which is that over the past, say, 40 years, the the entrenched systems that thrive on American money, labor, and opinion have ratcheted down, and they're just ratcheting almost exponentially with each passing year. And obviously, this is in a context of rising scarcity, rising environmental toxicity, rising social and relational toxicity, and rising militarism in the what we call the developed nation. I mean, I don't know what they developed, a disease. What does developed mean? They have buildings. But
Yes, I think so.
yeah, I think that's what it means. They have buildings, right?
Yeah, and plumbing.
Yeah. So you know, these systems are driven really by processes that are dead inside. It literally is like demons. I won't keep ringing that bell, but it might as well be because they do the same thing.
Yeah, no, it's just I always think of this as unwieldy machine kind of going forward,
Yeah.
just
Eating up
trampling on
lives and
everything.
yeah, eating
Yeah,
up
just
lives and
trampling.
bodies.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
yeah.
environments. It's like a meat grinder, but what does it grind out? Machines, technology? I don't even quite understand what it
It's all
produces.
about control, I guess.
Well, it produces little new, it sort of metastasizes like a cancer, right? And then it builds a new form and then metastasizes that. And it just keeps kind of doing these things, just keep doing this. And the humans, it's ironic to me that they're angry at, for example, immigrants or, people who they think are soft on crime or something like this, because the actual perpetrators that are destroying their lives are completely invisible to them. They have no
Well, I was
idea.
going to say, if we wanted to actually make our society a healthy society, we could do that. You know,
Yes.
I mean, it would probably be less work than keeping this going. I mean, if we really cared about, the plight of children, let's say, and growing and developing them into happy humans, we would change everything and the way we do everything.
Yeah.
But we're not serious about anything. America, I was told this in my first week of community college, and if there's an open wound, then we'll put a band-aid on it and look in the other direction. That's kind of how we operate with our laws and politics and everything. We're not trying to act, there's no genuine desire to make America work better. I mean,
Hmm.
they'll be like, oh, look, I passed this law, and now this tiny subset of people are going to get this slight advantage for about 5 minutes, you know. It's like,
Yeah,
okay,
exactly.
you know.
Meanwhile, let's pour, 9 kinds of gasoline on 6 other fires.
Yeah, exactly.
You
And then
know.
be like, oh, there's a fire, so we're going to need to tax you for this, whatever. So it just, it's always very frustrating. And I suppose if I talk to anyone in any kind of area where they know they're going to feel the same way, where, I dare say you could have a similar conversation with people who work in the healthcare field, and they're going to talk to you about how inhumane it all is and how stupid it all is, and how it could be this place where we actually care about the health of Americans and want people to live healthy lives, but that's not the healthcare system or anything. But certainly in the criminal justice system, if you talk to anyone who's paying attention, any defense attorney who cares, they're going to say, we need this, we need that, we got to get rid of the foster care system, or we have to rework it. We have to come up with a better way of looking. We have to stop, we have to deal with why are people using drugs? Why are people needing to seek oblivion? What's wrong? You
Exactly. Yeah.
know?
This is what I meant, by using the analogy of the lead in the gasoline, because
Yeah.
we did eventually realize, oh, that's poisonous. So
That makes
apparently they stopped putting lead in gasoline, right?
yes,
And
that is true.
violent crime went down, I think, if I remember correctly about this. Now, but what we have now are like, I don't know, 12,000 different kinds of toxicity in the environment that's completely unregulated. And it's damaging people's bodies and their minds, and then the abject failure of any kind of real communal basis for our humanity. I mean, the thing that humans most need is a meaningful role,
Mm-hmm.
right? They need meaningful roles, and this, I think, is part of what motivated you, is that you wanted to live in a way that you felt that the role that you were enacting was true to your spirit and your heart, right? And I
Yeah.
think it's amazing that you've done that, even though I understand why you say it's depressing and demoralizing.
Well, I mean, let me just be clear. Like, I would like, I got it was that you ever watched that film Moneyball or whatever? It's a film where they find this kind of like this little opening, and so there was a little opening that we got through, and we got a bunch of people out through that opening, and that door has slammed now, and it's probably going to be slammed well beyond the scope of my career, or maybe it'll open up again. I don't know. It depends, but the whole thing was based on the discretion of one person. And so that's crazy,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
So now I'm back to the courts and the judges and working in the system that way and the law. And, it's just stacked against people who've committed crimes or been convicted of crimes. There's no room for humanity. There's no room for like the idea that maybe this person is not, it could return to the community, to their family, could become a taxpayer, like could benefit the whole that no, no. We have we just no. We set the sentences. There's no discretion. We doors slam, come out in 15 years. We're not interested in anything else beyond that. So it is hard, you know. It's a hard job because you know, very few people, and you know, there are people that I know who shouldn't be in prison are going to stay in prison and their lives. And you know, I have these two clients, brothers, um, who were wrongfully convicted in 1995 of murder. I was able to get one of the brothers out on clemency. I know they're innocent. I know they're innocent. It's not like I don't feel it like in some naive way. I've got recanting affidavits. I've got evidence of prosecutorial misconduct. I've got Brady violations. I know that this man should get out, but I don't know whether I'm going to be able to get him out because everything is against us and no one cares. No one cares. No one cares. And yet, this man and his brother, between them, have lost 60 years of their lives. His children had to grow up without a father. You know, his parents had to take the grief. The sad tragedy just goes in every direction, you know. And I'm sitting here like it's great that the younger brother got out, and I thank the governor for doing that. But the older brother, I'm scared for him
Mhm.
because his life, he can't win. Even if he gets out, they stole 30 years of his life from him.
Mhm.
He can't come back from that.
Yeah. It's like it's like a crime happens, and then the system wakes up and does its malignant nonsense. And then we just pour like plutonium or radioactivity, right, into the social and relational environment as if that's going to solve something. I mean, I guess what it solves is money builds up in somebody's coffers and power builds up in somebody's coffers.
Power. I'll tell you one group of people that no one could care less about in this country, the children of incarcerated people. There is such a shocking lack of humanity for those children. You know, like no one cares about them and how that's going to affect them and
Mm.
the loneliness and the heartbreak that they go through, you know? And yeah, it's extraordinary to me. I've seen it kind of manifest in a variety of ways. Just no one, that's not even a factor. Now it used to be. If you go back 100 years and I look at how the criminal justice system was operating at the beginning of the 20th century, before everything got so professionalized, you would see governors releasing a third of the prison community every year on clemency. You would see them releasing people because their family needed them, or because their wife was sick, or because they were needed to help at the harvest. Like practical solutions, like, yes, it's true they still had prisons, but the prisons weren't there to keep people hostage for the rest of their lives, you know?
Right.
They would release people because it was for the bad. They could balance the needs of everyone. They won't do that now.
I just want to highlight again that what I think the direction, whether or not we can go there, is a separate question. But the direction toward justice does not look like punishing perpetrators. It looks like education, rehabilitation, and the forensic examination of what produced the conditions that led this person in this direction and resolving those in our culture. That is an actual plan that makes sense. It's
Mm-hmm.
intelligent, humane, cost effective, and will work, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we're going to keep doing this other crap, then what's going to happen is more and more violent crime and the industrialization of the punishment of prisoners. So that now it becomes like a business. Now it's a profitable thing to run prisons. I mean, what do you think about the sort of corporatization of for-profit prisons?
Well, we don't have those in Oregon, so I haven't kind of experienced that. I haven't been into a for-profit prison. I mean, certainly a sickening concept. But then, I mean, you know, all our prisons are funded by the taxpayers in Oregon. Oh, gosh, if they knew where their money was going. Um, I mean, yeah, no, it's extremely unhealthy. I mean, you know, I was reading a book recently about prisons down in Louisiana, and of course, you know, they got rid of slavery. What's that? Oh.
Prisons in Louisiana.
Yeah, they got rid of slavery and then they started incarcerating the entire black population. There was something like 400 crimes a black person could go to prison for and 20 crimes a white person could go to prison for. And so
Right.
that's how they then funded all they got their slave labor back that way.
Right.
And that went on for a long time.
Hmm.
And they made it easier to convict people by getting a 10-2, not even non-unanimous stuff. And so I mean, in Oregon, all the prisoners are required by law to work for the Oregon Corrections Enterprises, and they all earn about $50 a month working full time for the state. If you call up the DMV in Oregon, it'll be a prisoner who answers the phone.
Hmm.
So I mean, it's yeah,
It's slavery.
yeah, it is absolutely
Right.
indentured servitude or something. Anyway,
Hmm.
it's even in our Constitution that it's allowed, like it's proudly so, you know. So,
Wow.
yeah, we're allowed to use prisoners as slaves. That's constitutional, temporarily, hopefully. Well, I don't know. So yeah, I mean, basically, you're right. It's not difficult if you're going to put somebody in prison and remove them from society and know that they're going to come back to society at some point, it would make common sense to make sure they're going to come back and be successful.
Right.
Everyone. I mean, that's just obvious.
And
You know?
how can that possibly happen after 20 years in prison? I mean, you come out with the shadow of the crime on your record. If you're a felon, you have to tell everyone that you're a felon. All of your social contacts are gone. Your family may or may not still exist or talk to you or anything. I mean, what is the person going to do? We've given them such a staggering array of disadvantages that the expectation that they're going to become, I mean, this language sickens me anyway, a productive member of society. What is that? Okay, you're going to serve the lumbering monsters that, started the problem in the first place?
No, it's worse than that because of course most people, well, most of my clients have been in prison 30 or 40 years. So I've got people who went to prison in 1988 and they come out in 2024. Can you even begin to imagine that?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and so now they're handed a smartphone and said, "Here, deal with this for all aspects of your life." I mean, we've had to get used to it year by year as the technology's improved. So
Hmm.
they went to prison when pagers were barely invented, when VHSs was all the new thing,
Yeah, we were
and
listening to cassettes.
yeah, exactly. And like they come out and they don't understand the world and they don't feel comfortable. They don't feel lives. I mean, they're not even used to working properly because
Not
they
only that, I
basically
mean, try and
treaded
think about
water for 40 years, you know?
try and think about try and think about the problem just of housing.
Yeah.
When you went into prison, you could earn enough to house yourself, pretty reasonably, right? Who's going to be able to earn $2,000 a month to house themselves when they come out of prison? Or, 1,500. That's a huge amount of money. What is their skill base? They've got no connections. They have a felony.
Yeah, and
Nobody wants.
maybe they've got a skill in prison where, some of them, I mean, there are some trades that you can learn, but then no one wants to hire you because you've been in prison for 30 years or something. It's really
Right.
difficult. It's really, really difficult. And it's also just emotionally so hard for them
Yeah, it's
because
absolutely demoralizing.
yeah, yeah. And so a lot of, I've seen how, and of course, one of the big things that makes me crazy is, you hear prosecutors yakking away about community safety and about all of this stuff. And I have seen the first client I got out actually, um, he was he'd been in for 18 years. He'd been in since he was 18. And so I hear all this talk in court about, blah, blah, blah. And we got this whole process and rehabilitation, yada, yada. So when they got him out, he was in jail. We had a court hearing where they ruled that they had to release him. And they were meant to release him that evening, and they didn't release him. And the jail didn't want to release him. And so there's a huge drama. And then they said they weren't going to release him to the following morning, and I could go pick him up at 5 in the morning. And I get a call at about 1 in the morning, and it's from a number I didn't recognize. And I answer it, and it's my client. And they'd kicked him out of the jail at 1 in the morning with a plastic bag of possessions, no shoes, a pair of pants for a man who's about 200 pounds heavier than him. So he had to hold his pants up, and no money. Luckily, I'd had him memorize my number, and he met someone on a bridge who gave him my number. And I went and picked him up from a bridge at 1 in the morning. Now, this kid he was in his late 30s. He'd been in prison since he was 18. He didn't know any, like, that was how they released him. So don't tell me you care about the safety of the community, because that's a joke. And I've had that happen twice, where people literally just got kicked out of prison without any kind of preparation or any housing arranged for them or anything. And I've had diabetic clients who get kicked out of prison with no medication.
Hmm.
And or people with mental issues that are sent out without their medication. I mean, it's just a joke. Like, at every point, it's a callous, indifferent joke. Um, and it's not benefiting one person. Not one regular American has benefited from this. But Americans are unfortunately so conditioned to believe that anyone who's convicted of a crime is an irredeemable, dangerous person who doesn't deserve anything anymore. That it doesn't, that they're so conditioned to believe that no change is possible until people realize that's not true.
That's interesting because what you're suggesting is that to be convicted of a crime is effectively in America a nominal death sentence.
I mean, it's certainly a civil death of sorts, you know. I mean, you can't vote or participate in society properly. There's a lot of things that happen after a conviction. But yes, I would say so. I'd say it's a life sentence, if not a death sentence, you know.
Hmm.
I mean, you'll always meet people who are like, I'm trying to get off papers. I'm trying to get off papers. They just want to not have to be continuously owned, because it's very easy to mess up when you're under that level of scrutiny. I mean, I wouldn't want to be scrutinized, nor would you, nor would anyone,
Hmm.
because we're all criminals. If you open the federal code, they can find a crime
Right.
for anyone.
Yes, yes, that's the other thing. The people who are, shaking their finger at the criminals, how many untried crimes are they guilty of?
Yeah.
100,
I
1,000?
mean, we all
Yeah. Like
are.
there's a sort of a comedy skit where the comedian gets up on stage and says to like, so how many of you people copied a video or a song, right? And just give
Yeah.
me a show of hands, right? Everybody raises their hands. And then they're like, okay, the FBI agents that are there on the corners of the room, they'll be talking to you right now, ladies and gentlemen. And basically, the whole audience gets arrested, right?
Yeah, it's
Um,
true. We have
it
too
just
many
depends.
laws,
Yeah. I
you
mean,
know?
there's so many laws that it's probably nearly impossible to not break some of them. And there's also, I mean, there's a variety of problems. Like, violent crime is a different thing from monetary crime or theft or, vandalism or trespassing or something like this. But I think my point is that not only do the prisons not help these people, okay, actually, there's another point I want to make before it gets lost. We treat criminals as if they're separate from us.
Hmm.
And I have to say for myself, and I'm just speaking for myself, if there's one person in prison, I feel like part of me is in prison. I don't feel separate. I can think of myself as an individual and I can live my life as an individual. And that's what America tells us to be. And if I start talking like this, my conservative friends will be like, "Oh, you mean you're a communist?" Like, no, I'm not a communist. I'm a human being,
Mm.
right? I don't think we're actually separate in the way that we imagine ourselves to be. We may think that we are. We've been trained to conceptualize the individual as a separate being. But when those people are in prison, I feel like part of me is in prison and they're not separate. This is why I feel suffering when I know someone else is suffering. I don't object to prisons simply because it's wrong to torture humans. I object to prisons because I feel tortured by their existence. I feel tormented by that.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. It's like, if we're all humans together, then, which we are, you know,
Yeah.
then to turn yourself away from the plight of all these other people is inhumane of you to some degree. You're disconnecting yourself from your humanity to be able to do that,
I mean,
which
it's
people
much
are
worse
able.
than it's much
Yeah.
worse than that because I have to fund it,
Yeah.
right? So it's not just I'm
Yeah.
turning my head away. I'm giving dollars to make sure that gets continued.
It's so painful. Like when I first started doing this back in, I guess I was going into the prisons in 2017. I was in the prisons maybe 3 or 4 days a week. I was there all the time, and it's so hard. So like I would be so mentally exhausted, so emotionally fraught from it. And now I can barely go into prison anymore. Like I have to force myself to go. Um, it just is so soul crushing. And then you leave your clients there, and they're so, it's just not a way, it's so awful what it does to people to make them so powerless, to strip their autonomy in such an extreme way. It's harder and harder for me to be able to face going into prison, you know, because it's just terrible for everyone involved,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah,
But at the same time, other parts of me from doing this work have also made me question, like, what can be done. These, I've meet people, I've listened in hearings where the families of people who were murdered talk, and the pain and agony, and just the way the world is never good again for them after something so terrible has happened. And there's different kinds of victims. I've met some people who are just they won't, they're here to, they don't ever, this person has to die in prison because their family member died, and I don't even know, who am I to judge that emotion. That's for them very important, that it is a betrayal of their family member if this person ever gets out of prison because they don't get to be free again, and that's how they think. And then there are other people who've dug deep within their souls, and they've known that forgiveness is the only path for them. And it's the hardest thing for them to do, even knowing that, because the pain of their loss, of the life that didn't get to happen the way it should have, of that, whether it's a son or a brother or a daughter, child, knowing that they didn't get to love, to live, to have a family, to grow old, to have all of those privileges taken away from them. But they force themselves to forgive because they know it's the only pathway to their healing. And I've heard other victims who are like broken by, it's so painful knowing their pain, and what they've all been told is that prison is a solution, and it isn't for them. They know, it it's just so crushing to listen to them. It has, it takes a lot out of you to hear that kind of raw pain, and so I have I'm still confused about how I feel about it all. Sometimes I'm like, maybe, I remember talking to a prosecutor when I started, and he just said there are some crimes from which I do not think a person can come back. And that's why I believe in the death sentence now. I think the death sentence is a vile thing, but I believe that was a genuine belief, you know.
I'm so glad you mentioned these things. And it's interesting because one of the beautiful, I mean, there's so many beautiful things that are happening right now, but in our talk, that I'm just so joyful that others will get to hear and understand some of your perspectives and feelings and concerns and your work history and stuff, and why you're committed to this. Um, but there's another problem that I want to be very clear about, which is this idea, and it's a poisonous idea. It's a lethal, cancerous idea. And it's the idea that that one's personal identity is a permanent thing. So that if I steal a candy bar when I'm 5,
You're,
I'm a thief for the rest of my life.
yeah, I know.
Right? That label has to stick forever. And it seems we don't understand, like, not we, the systems, the malignant systems that do these things, that sort of perpetuate this nightmare. Um, they treat individual identity as if it can sustain a mark for eternity, right? So that if Joe, say, was drunk and killed someone when he was 17, he's a murderer for the rest of his life or whatever. And the actual fact is that I am not the same person that I was when I was younger. I am a different person now. And if there's to be anything resembling justice, then we have to undo this. I'm gonna slap a label on you, and that label will stay there forever, right? Because the person who commits a crime is not the same person necessarily 1 year later, 2 years later, 3 years later. This is what it means to be human. It doesn't mean, I once kicked a dog, so I'm a dog kicker from now on.
That's what I do.
Yeah,
No, it is so true. And it was, it's something I've come up against a lot, especially when doing clemency. And I would be working with people who had committed crimes when they were teenagers. They'd killed someone. And when they were 7, 6, 15, 16, 17, 18, and now they're in their late 40s, say. And I would tell the story, and with every single juvenile crime that I've ever worked with, there's a million reasons as to why this crime happened that involve things outside of it. It's just this was a child,
yeah.
and so, and then they've gone to prison, and they've gone and just led this incredible life, and they've, done hospice, and they've healed people, and they've written books, and they've created programs for the betterments of others. They've mentored people. They've lived a life where they love and give and serve and believe that they have an unpayable debt to society that they wake up every morning and try and pay. And that it's these incredible human beings that I've met. And so I'll write these stories and just be so, and I cry reading my own petitions because their stories were so incredible, and the strength of character they've displayed is so monumental, knowing the darkness of their lives at 18 being told you will never get out of prison, you will never be released, and yet they created these amazing lives in prison of service. And I get to the DA, and I have to send a copy of the petition to the DA, and then the district attorney, then he has to weigh in on his position to the governor about whether he will oppose clemency. And of course, prosecutors are in the game of putting people in prison. So clemency is somewhat, they see it somewhat as undermining the work that they've done.
Right.
And they will look at this and they will say, no, this person is irredeemable. This person must never get out of prison. This person is a danger to society. He is an evil killer. And they will deny all evidence of the 30 years, whilst in the next breath talking about how they believe in juvenile, rehabilitation and all of this stuff. Like it's like a disconnect. They're labeled criminal at 18 or labeled murderer at 15, and no one can see past that, and they refuse to, or they deny it. Luckily our governor could. And so quite a few of these young men and women got out who
In
were
in
all
that
doing
window.
great, in that tiny window that we had.
Right. This is the
Yeah,
thing that came
yeah,
out that I think is very important that's come out in this. One of the things that's come out in the conversation is that you were able to succeed for a very short window.
yeah.
It went from despair to a short window of success to despair.
Yeah, it was really interesting what happened because it was all political. So the governor, she came into office in 2015. We knew that she had been a juvenile rights lawyer earlier in her career. So a few petitions were given to her for youthful offenders. We felt, not, I wasn't involved in that, but the lawyer who originally, she had kind of managed to get commutations for a few of these juveniles who had done exceptionally well. Then, as I mentioned to you earlier, I had 2 or 3 years where I was submitting petitions and getting denied, 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 denied. Then what happened is she granted the first DOC, Department of Corrections, commutation to a woman client of mine in February of 2020. Then COVID happened. And I think COVID then, she let out a couple more of our clients in like April or May of that year. And then George Floyd died. And when George Floyd died, I think it gave her, she was already really interested in doing it, but I think she became very interested in how Black people had been treated in the system in Oregon. And so she wanted to help out people of color more, which is a slight issue in Oregon because 92% of the prison population is white. So, it's not just Black people who are getting poorly treated in Oregon. It's everyone, and so that thing happened, and so she granted quite a few commutations. maybe I was getting a commutation a month through COVID, or maybe every 6 weeks. I was getting commutations for incredible people because I was able to, right, because I was there doing it first, I kind of was able to pick these amazing people to do clemency. And then the media got wind of it. So in April 2022, I had one client get out, and the media got hold of it because it was the primaries were going on, the DA races, the governor was up, there was an election coming up, and the media got onto it. And I remember my client had got out the week before. I go to England, I get to the airport at Heathrow, and I see woke governor releases convicted murderer. And I'm my 18-year-old client. And I'm like, oh God, and the door shut. Now, she did grant a few more right at the end of her term, but basically the door shut in that moment. The media turned nasty and the commutation, they stopped.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you for telling that story. That's so important. You can see the machinations of those monolithic processes there,
Yeah.
right? They're like,
Yeah.
this little thing over here, we're going to shut that down.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
not part of our process.
Yeah.
And you can see other features of these processes in what you were talking about earlier. The work I've done as a prosecutor, right? What's going on there is the prosecutor has no interest in justice. What they've done is they've equated their personal identity, which has been essentially counterfeited, right? Because they're just somebody who puts people in prison now. So they've equated their personal identity with keeping people in prison. And any threat to those people, any threat that could arise, any opportunity that could arise to release those people becomes a threat to their personal identity. This has nothing to do with justice. It has nothing to do with law. It has to do with a human being hollowed out inside and becoming like, I punish criminals, right? I'm
Yeah.
like a golem or an automaton. I work for this process that tortures humans.
Yeah, I mean, I think they see it as they would be talking about, the jury process if it went to trial, and you're undermining the will of the jury who don't, or alternatively, if they pleaded, they're lying. This person's lying. That's not what happened, even though they don't know what happened because they
Right.
were there and it was a plea deal. And so that would be their arguments, or that would be their justifications.
But
For
what I'm
but
trying to get at
really,
is
what it
like,
is that they don't want, and they would see the clemency power, which is in the Constitution. It was put in the Oregon Constitution, like most constitutions. It came from the federal Constitution. And the idea, as the founders said, was that justice can be very harsh. And they wanted a mechanism for mercy to be given within the system because it's needed, because the justice system doesn't always work as it's
mhm,
intended. And for that, it was put into the Oregon Constitution, and they saw the use of it as lawlessness, as the governor running roughshod over the law. But it was the ultimate law. It's in the Constitution. That's higher than any statute that the legislature's passed. But they
brilliant.
saw it as lawless behavior of the governor that had to be stopped. And it
Yeah,
did,
see,
you
this
know?
this thing, the media and these
Yeah.
prosecutors and even the governor, they're complicit. They have become organs of an inhuman process that is dominating our culture and our lives, and it's producing crime. What I want to make very clear is that if we're actually concerned, go ahead.
Yes, but also they're criminalizing things that shouldn't be.
Mhm.
So yes, obviously serious crimes, murder and like armed rob, we all know those crimes. But I've seen people going to prison for things that are just asinine. I'm reminded of this one 15-year-old who I worked with at one point who was outside, it was New Year's Eve. He's outside a market. A man walks out of the market with a six-pack of beer, and he rushes the guy, shoves him, grabs a six-pack of beer and runs. 5 years, 15-year-old, 5 years in prison and a felony conviction. Is that really wise? Is that really what we want to do? Put him in prison for the rest of his high school years?
Was he
You know,
black?
what?
Was he black?
No, he was white.
Ah,
Is Oregon though, so most people are white. But
now you did
the
say,
governor did give him clemency.
say again.
The governor did grant him a commutation.
Ah, excellent.
Yeah. But I
So
mean, I'm
did,
like, what are you doing? Putting him in, like charging him with, like, why? Why are you doing this? This is not
right.
going to help anyone.
Yeah, a six
Yeah.
pack, 5 years.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, again, cruel and unusual has an actual scope, right? And if you're,
Yeah.
but the weird thing is, it's like what we're doing is so absurd that cruel and unusual is the spirit of the thing. So how can you use that to object?
Well, and
Right?
most Americans are so unaware, like, I'll say, hey, you know that we have the highest level of incarceration in the world. We're really only in line with like Belarus and Russia and China. And even then, we may be worse than them in some ways and maybe nicer in other ways. I mean, no first world country criminalizes and incarcerates people like we do. You do know that the longest sentence in most countries in Europe is less than 20 years. You do know that, like, no. They don't. They think they assume that this is normal.
Yeah, um, this is absolutely draconian,
Yeah.
and it's been this way here for a long, long time.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely been, I mean, if you look at your history, I mean, obviously, well, in many, we had the death penalty, but so did most countries like that was something that people have got rid of. It's something that we haven't got rid of. It's still shocking to me. Really, there's no more, I mean, I don't know how any justification exists to execute citizens, having the state having the power to kill citizens, just
No,
in a country where we have
I
a
mean,
prison.
one person's dead, so let's kill another.
I know. It's just I always the
There's
best film
this.
I've ever watched on that was, did you ever watch Dead Man Walking?
Yes,
Love that
I
film.
wrote I wrote poems. I was crushed. It
That film.
ruined
I
me.
mean, I can't watch that film again, but I've never seen anything really capture to me the grief that comes in every direction from a crime when it happens, and
Yeah,
just
it's
all the
this
stuff.
thing where like I mean, it's God, there's so much I want to say. How can I articulate this? It's a fundamental violation, not merely of our humanity, but of the nature of being. It's like a stain on our planet, our not just our people, like as a stain on the universe. It's fundamentally wrong in such a catastrophic way. What it's not we that do this, but what these processes
Well, it's
do.
being done in our names, so to speak.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, gosh, I'm having the same problem you had. Um, did you where you lost your train of
I
thought?
know I have all these great thoughts that disappear immediately.
No, we're getting
Um,
older. And,
yeah.
did you actually say that 92% of the prison population in Oregon is white?
Something like that. Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I mean, it's a very white state. You
Wow,
know,
okay.
it may not be. I can probably double check that, but
No,
it's
no, sure.
yeah,
But
it's close to that, I think. I may be off by a few percent, but yeah, it is not that's not representative of the rest of the country, you know.
there's this other thing that I know about because I have a friend who's currently in prison, and he talked about when he went into the prison. I just want to mention this briefly that there's sort of like a layered array of poisonous cultures in there, right?
Mm.
So when he went to the prison that he's in, he had to join what's called a car. Have you heard
That
this?
was he in California?
Yeah,
I know California is much more racial in the way it's broken down, and you
yeah,
have to go in. I mean, from what I don't know, I've only been into one California prison, and it was a women's prison, so I don't know that culture. Um, but yeah, I've heard that in California you have to go by race. You can't deviate from that, and so
yeah. So
yeah.
um, if I remember what he told me, and I'm probably going to get it a little bit wrong, but I'll try for the record just to say something about it. There's um there's like a black car. There are two Hispanic cars. One's super ganged up, and the other one's a little less violent. Um, there's a sort of a what would you even call it? Like a white supremacist car,
Mhm.
right? And then there's the worst car of all, which is what most of the sex offenders belong to.
Yep.
and those people just get picked on. And it's a complex hierarchy of power within each of the cars, and the cars negotiate your fate.
I don't think it's not so defined in Oregon, but sex offenders absolutely are have the worst time in prison. Now, what we as lawyers are interesting, the rape murderers don't do so badly.
Mhm.
So you're definitely better off. Murder's better than sex crime of any kind, really. But yeah, so people, any kind of sex offender is going to have a difficult time in prison. Um, and obviously there are gangs naturally, um, but it's not you can avoid that quite easily in Oregon if you don't want to be a part of it. Now, if you
Hmm.
come from a gang, when you go into prison, it's going to be harder for you to separate from the gang in prison. If you're a gang member and you want to renounce being a gang member, that is very difficult, but it can be done. I have clients who've done it.
I mean, let's be clear about what very difficult means. It means beatings, rape, or death.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, it's very, very difficult. You're going to get in a lot of trouble. Um,
So my point is that, I mean, actually, I don't have a specific point. I just want to be very clear about something. And I don't know how it is in states other than California, um, but here you have to pick a car, and you may be, if your crime had something to do with sex, then you're automatically generally in. And there might be another car or two that I didn't mention. Those are the ones I can remember from when I went to visit my friend and talk to him about like what's going on. Da, 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 da. And so what I'm trying to get at is the people in prison are not merely punished by being in a cage. They are subjected to the scrutiny and extremely harsh authority of gang leaders, criminal. Essentially, there's a separate government inside the prison systems, and whether there's cars or not in Oregon, you can bet there's a government of among the prisoners, and
oh
the
yeah.
prisoners punish each other and torment and torture each other based on their sense of some kind of malignant shadow version of what the people on the outside think should happen to criminals. You follow me?
Oh, very much so. I mean, prison politics, as we call it, is just, I mean, as a lawyer, I'm just like, oh, I can't stand it. Like, because the constant political is, you're saying if you get too involved in the politics, you're going to end up in trouble in prison. But it is, you're right. They police each other. And then the minorities are, if you're a minority within a minority within a minority. So, like I was talking to one of my black clients in Oregon prisons, he's like, we're the most hated minority within the most hated minority because we're not just prisoners now, we're black prisoners. So we have like and in Oregon they're a tiny minority. So the blacks prisoners have to really stick together. Um, because they're in such a minority in the prison. But yeah, no, they just make each other's lives hell, and all the rules and all of that stuff. We're always just like, oh, as a lawyer, I'm just like, I can't stand it when my clients get involved in all of that because they always end up in the hole. They always end up in segregation, and you can get in, like I also have to deal with people trying to get out of prison, and what your prison record is will define a lot of the time whether you're getting out of prison. And so, it can be really, really, I mean, your whole life is fraught by these insane racial politics that you can't control or want no part in, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I have some of my clients who've talked to me about the hell of being in segregation for, in solitary for 2 years
Mm-hmm.
in next to a bunch of white supremacists who are talking about, eugenics all day long in front of you and like trying to bait you into violence. I mean, it's really horrible. It's just a horrible, toxic environment, intentionally so, obviously, you know.
It's
And
also it's much worse for people who already belong to any marginalized class. Um, it's vastly more dangerous for them. And what I'm trying to say here is that the idea of a prison sentence no one can be sure it's not a death sentence
Oh, definitely, yeah. And then
in a
of course
lot of cases.
we haven't talked about medical neglect, which creates
Oh
even.
yeah, let's go there. I mean, I don't know how you're doing on time. I'm willing to stay as long as, and we
Well,
can
I've
even
got
do,
someone standing. I just received a message from someone wanting to know. I've probably got at least another 10 minutes. So let's talk about medical neglect.
yeah. But I
Okay.
want to say just a couple things briefly before that.
Yeah.
When a person is accused of a crime, and this is super important, what happens is in many cases, unless it's just a single charge, they'll stack up an array of charges and they'll go like, okay, we're going to try you for this and this and this and this and this and this and this, or you can plea to this,
Yes, that's correct. That's how they do it. So they
right?
charge you with attempted murder, assault one, assault two. In fact, what you did is you were rather unpleasant and you slapped your roommate or punched your roommate, let's say. Um, and I had a guy like this who he was facing 20 years in prison. Most people will take 7 years when really they should have got 90 days,
Right.
and yeah, that is how it works. You
Yeah.
know, they
I mean,
overcharge.
I've known two or three people who I'm pretty certain didn't commit a crime,
Yeah.
but compared to trying to litigate and go through the jury process on six accusations,
The risk is too great, you know?
it's way too great. You can end up in
Yeah.
prison for 30
But one of
years.
the most sort of obnoxious elements of the plea deal process is the idea that you're going into contract. And the whole idea of a contract is that the parties have equal power. So if you and me want to go into contract with each other on anything, we both can walk away equally. We both got equal power, and therefore the contract is fair, right? But you've got somebody who's sitting in jail, and you've got a prosecutor who's got all the power, and they're saying, well, you go to trial and you'll be in prison for 20 years, or take this deal for 5 years. And so they're like, I'll take it, but I didn't do anything, I didn't do anything. Then they
Right.
get to prison and they're like, oh, why did I take that deal? I shouldn't have taken that deal. I didn't do anything wrong. I'm going to try and challenge my conviction. And no one in the world cares because you took a plea deal, which means you accepted guilt. And so you're
Yeah.
done. And no one really, and at the time, it's so awful, and it's not, I mean, the plea deal system alone, we should be ashamed of. I mean, back up until the 70s, it was considered a really nasty thing, a plea deal, like a very corrupt backroom thing. And now it's just that's how our system works. That's how we
Yeah.
do it in America.
Exactly.
You
And
know?
by the way, I just want to be clear that as time progresses, this is the spirit of the game, right? We keep importing new malignancies to the process over and over again. And then it's just like, oh, well, this is how we do it, you know?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's like
Astonishing.
and the case law, there's no, I mean, I fight a lot of this because I do these post-conviction cases for people. And, you know, it's really difficult because you've got these people who've taken these plea deals they shouldn't have taken probably, but at the same time, their defense attorney had no leverage.
Right.
That the defense attorney has given them good advice, which is that if you go to trial, you could end up in prison for 20 years. And frankly, the juries, do you want to really risk that with a jury? Or we could just take this deal and it's just there's no good outcome here for this person. And they're angry with their defense attorney, and the defense attorneys have usually got an insanely heavy caseload. So they look at these plea deals and they're thinking this is the best option for them. I mean,
It's blackmail. It's
I
straight up
basically
blackmail.
say, my belief is, if you're indicted, you're fucked unless you get really lucky. And and anyone can be indicted by a grand jury, because the grand jury process is just mad. Basically, the prosecutor goes in and only recently did we even start seeing transcripts in Oregon. Before then, we would just get some notes, and they can basically say, "This is what happened." They tell it, there's no ability to defend it, and this is a crime has happened. The grand jury pretty much always are going to indict, and so if the prosecutor's interested in you for a crime, and they can get a grand jury to indict, which takes no effort, you're fucked.
Hmm. Yeah, it's the slipperiest of slopes. Okay,
Yeah,
medical neglect.
yeah. Well, you know. I should get one of my friends to talk to you about that who do medical habeas cases because it's sickening.
Yeah.
But basically, they don't, they're trying they're trying to kill they're trying to kill all my clients. No, but I mean, I've had they literally, some of the inhumanity and the neglect is just unbelievable. People dying of cancer left, right, and center who shouldn't be dying, not getting the care that they've been mandated by doctors. I had a client who died of cancer in prison a couple of years ago. He shouldn't have died. There was over 9 months after the scan showing he had cancer before anything was done. 9 months sitting there with no medical attention. And then by the time he needed chemo and when it was getting really, they would keep him, they would deny him wouldn't take him to the hospital for more than like 1 out of 6 appointments for chemo. They just do this all the time. They deny them medication. They ignore medical. It's just awful. I can't even articulate it. Like the food that they're eating is poison. Like
Mhm.
the women had so many stomach problems. I mean, the IBS level and all the diverticulitis and all of that is like off the charts. I mean, and then the food that they're eating is, the average woman in Oregon puts on 50 pounds in the first year of being incarcerated. And it's to do with depression, a sedentary lifestyle, and then the garbage they're eating.
Mhm.
You know, it's so I actually can't handle it. I have two of my best lawyer friends do medical habeas cases where they fight with DOC to get medical care for prisoners. I couldn't do it. I don't have the stomach for it.
Mhm.
It's too painful and awful to see this kind of neglect going on a daily basis. But if you want to explore that, I'm more than happy to connect you with someone.
I
It
would.
is,
I would like
yeah,
to explore that. And
yeah.
it's conceivable that we can have a second conversation as well. I know that your time, is limited now and you have to go.
I have
But I
a
want to say a
boyfriend
couple of,
waiting outside of the house.
oh,
So
really? Oh my goodness. I'm sorry. Um,
he's,
okay.
I know, no, it's fine.
Okay. Um,
Well, the boyfriend. The only,
I just, I think I don't think that it was your goal to do this, but you have become, by choosing what you've chosen to do, you've become sort of like an angel in human skin. If you got one person out, I know that you're really concerned and you feel like, wow, it's a drop in a buck in a swimming pool. I know,
it
I get it.
is. I mean, I don't
But
deny that I'm so happy for every one of my clients that they get to live in freedom. They get to, like, for a lot of them, it was having the ability to die free. And I understand how important that is. But I think we all feel like we were all new lawyers, myself and some of the other of my friends who did it at the same time. We, the door shut and a lot of people got left behind that shouldn't have got left behind, that we weren't able to get out and may never get out. And, you know, it's dark.
it is, I get it. I hope that you might be open to having a second conversation. So I think there's a lot more we can go
Oh
over.
yeah, I'd love to. It's really great
This
talking
is
to
so
you.
brilliant. I am
Yeah.
so grateful, Venetia, for your spirit and your heart and your work in the world. I feel
And
like
you too.
you vicariously have carried this burden, for that many of us feel, but you actually walked into the trenches as a human being and did it. And I just celebrate that and I honor it. It's such a privilege to have this time to talk with you today.
Oh, likewise. It's been great to talk. Thank you so much.
Absolutely brilliant. Thank you.
Okay. Bye now.
Bye bye for now.
Bye. I don't know how to get off, so I'm just gonna, there we go.